Welcome, podcast listeners. This is episode 9 of the Security Simplified podcast. Joining me is my good friend, Ryan Cloutier. Ryan, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. Good to see you, Evan.
Yeah, it's good to be here, man. So we're, on the third installment now in this Information Security Governance Simplified series. So in episode 7, you might remember we defined what information security governance was. We used an analogy of comparing it for rules for the game, and just like you play a game at, get a game at Target, same kind of, principle applies for governance. Then in episode 8, the last episode, we talked about governance alignment and how important it is to have alignment in how you govern information security. And some telltale signs that you might be out of alignment with governance is, one, you don't get invited to meetings. Nobody wants you there because you're usually the no guy or gal. And another telltale sign is people are always looking for ways to skirt your controls, right, to get around them. That's usually a sign that you're not in alignment. So in episode 9, this one, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan, we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities. So starting from the top and working our way down, Ryan, let's talk about roles and responsibilities.
So a very important part of governance is establishing and clearly defining what roles and responsibilities are needed. In order for governance to be effective, people have to be clear about what is their responsibility, what do they need to be doing, and what is their role in governance. Now, ideally, when you set up a governance structure and you start assigning those roles and responsibilities, you should start at the top. You need some kind of executive level sponsor, somebody at the C level, the board of directors, preferably the highest person in the company should also have a role and a responsibility to the governance program. There's lots of sub roles, and we'll get into that as we go tonight. But ideally, having that structure in place, clearly defining what that is, makes governance easier to apply and adhere to.
Yeah, that's a good introduction. I think, starting at the board of directors, assuming there is a board of directors, I always like to tell people there are 4 things that a board of directors or an owner always needs to know. Just 4 things. You don't need to know technical things like firewall configs and stuff like that. But it's where are we at? Where are we going? When are we going to get there? And how much is it going to cost? That's why I like objective risk assessments, because I can give you a number on where we're at. I can give you a number on where we're going based on the risk decisions we made. I can tell you when we're going to get there based on our budget and those risk decisions, and I can tell you when we're going to get there. That way they can track along with the progress of the security program at the same time I am. And I think that's enough, typically at the board level, enough due care and due diligence, in my opinion. Do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think, you keep it pithy, right? When you are at that level, Evan's absolutely right. Focus on those core things that they're most concerned with, and don't bore them with unnecessary details.
No. Yeah, and exactly. And I've been in enough board meetings, beard and all, over the years. They say they'll give you 15 minutes, count on 5.
If that.
So if I can get my point across in 5 minutes and leave the rest to maybe Q&A if they want, we're good to go. But it's a good sign if I'm in and out of a board meeting relatively quickly. So the next level down from, roles or for board, from a board of directors is executive management. What tips do we have, or what should executive management, what role should they play in information security?
I think as a servant leader, I think the idea is that, their role should be to move those roadblocks, to help advocate for those budgets that you're asking for, to, help build the culture. I think that executive management's primary function in governance is culture adoption. They need to make governance and adoption of governance a cultural element of the business. And then I think their second primary function is to support those underneath them to accomplish the goals they're setting forth, to help articulate those risk decisions, to act as a translation interface back up to the board, right? To help kind of paint that picture between the technical needs and the business risks.
Yeah, I agree. The executive management, the CEO or whoever the top executive is in the organization needs to understand, and there's different executives, different motivators, right? Some executives are motivated by ego. Some are motivated by mission. Some are motivated by money. So figuring out what the motivation is for that executive and then fostering a relationship with them, because ultimately they are the ones responsible for information security. Whether they want to be or not, the buck stops with them, and getting that message across, that point across. If they truly do understand that, then they'll participate. What we don't want from an executive or from a CEO is tolerating security. We want you to be a champion of security. We understand that you have multiple other risks that you need to account for in running a company. This is just another risk, but it can't be a risk that we ignore. Other executives, CFO, CIO, COO, CTO, whatever other executives you have, we're peers. So that means there's mutual respect. I participate in their discussions. I do want to know where we're at financially. I do want to know what technology is coming. But I also expect the same sort of respect back to me. When I'm talking about security strategy, I expect their buy-in. It's pretty easy to tell, especially from an outsider, where the breakdown is in roles and responsibilities as you work your way down through the organization. It's not uncommon that it breaks right there. The CTO, the CFO, they're not bought in. Well, that's a problem, and we need to address that. So their roles is, be a champion of information security, just like I'd be a champion of financial stewardship for the CFO. And I also expect their buy-in as we start going towards implementation on certain, projects. I expect them to participate. So the next level down from that is directors and managers, sort of a middle management row. In small organizations, you probably don't have this sort of structure, but in larger organizations, you certainly will. What things do you see, Ryan, in terms of roles and responsibilities for directors and managers?
I think, that what I see is that their role and ultimately responsibilities are to ensure execution is happening, right? That they're the last leg of the accountability chain of leadership. And so they need to make sure that execution, delivery, quality, these things are in place, these things are happening. They need to be advocating up for gaps that they're seeing. We've got to watch out for burnout. I think a very important part of that, believe it or not, is also watching for things like burnout, right? So good culture, good governance, you're thinking about that. Are we working the folks at the bottom of the rung too hard and creating more risk? So for me, that I think is really the role of the director and the manager, and to handle some of those interdepartmental, political infights, if you will. I think that, you don't want to be bringing that stuff up to the executive management because then you look like a bunch of buffoons. But you also don't want to leave your doers down in the trenches to be burdened or bogged down by that nonsense. So I think that's an important part that they play in their role, and that their responsibility really is to ensure execution and communication both up and downstream.
Yeah, I love that. I agree with that completely. The execution downstream is, I do expect, as part of their role, to tell us about non-compliance issues, to tell us about challenges on certain controls that maybe we put in place that are not working for their teams. Mm-hmm. So without an open dialogue and communication with directors and managers, we often won't know, if it's broken there or not. And another thing, whether we decide to take the approach on certain security things as rewards-based, so reward for good behavior, managers should know their team well enough to tell us what things their employees would find valuable as we start developing ways to reward good behaviors using, good examples, good case studies. But I also, where there's non-compliance, will they participate in and enforce the rules, even to the point of termination? Will we have a disciplinary process in place that we can count on? Because if there's no bite, if there's no accountability, then don't expect compliance. So I expect that from directors and managers as well. But they're active participants. They're actually the ones that I would participate probably more than any other level of management. And when we talk about participating with management too, it's not unreasonable to expect a 15-minute meeting once a week with the CEO. I'm not asking for an hour. I'm just asking for 10, 15 minutes so I can just communicate with you what's currently going on, what are the hot issues, whether we're going to hit targets on what we communicated to the board of directors in terms of those 4 things. Stuff happens. We can have the best plans ever, but when something derails us, we need to get on the same page, because we don't want the CEO to find that out when we're in the board meeting.
Right. Or when he gets a call from the news outlet asking questions.
Exactly. So the next level down, and not necessarily down, but I guess, as we work through the organization, we have information security personnel. The people, whether it be the CISO I think has specific responsibilities, but then also all the personnel on their team. What do you have to say about that?
So as an information security person who loves my fellow information security people, I think we have the most confused and misunderstood role in the entire ecosystem. I think that we need to understand our role is not to make risk decisions. Our role is not to try to scare the business into going along with our way of thinking, even though we're the ones that suffer when they don't. But I think that most InfoSec people that I meet that are in the trenches, right, the doers of the group, not the leadership level, maybe don't understand that their role is to do the best with what they've got and accept what they can't change. It's the old serenity prayer. Every InfoSec person should know the serenity prayer and practice it often. And I think by us not being clear on what our role really is, we miss opportunities to affect positive change. We miss opportunities to create buy-in, to create culture within our organization, to get the CEO to give us those 15 minutes because he knows they're not going to be wasted on us telling him technical mumbo jumbo that he does not care about, or she, or they, or them, or whatever it is, okay? But I do think we have a very misunderstood role, and part of that I think is indicative of bad governance. We get a job as you're a SOC 1 analyst, and before you know it, you're neck deep in threat hunting and incident response and all these other things that are not necessarily in your wheelhouse, not even necessarily in your talent set or skill set. But because you're the InfoSec person, it falls to you. So I think we'd all be a lot better off if we were more clear that InfoSec's job at the personnel level is to implement risk decisions and to share threat information and risk information to the management, who then in turn communicates that to the business, and the business makes that risk decision, and that comes downstream and we implement. So that's my take.
Exactly. No, very well said. The CISO themselves, or whoever's leading the security program, and assuming it's a headless program, in smaller organizations, you may not have a CISO. You may not have an information security manager, and that's what I would call a headless program. Regardless, the function of the security team in the program is to consult the business to make good risk decisions. Now, it's different in every organization, right? Every organization has different risks. But that's job number one. And then job number two is to implement those risk decisions to the best of my ability. So that will dictate what my team looks like often. If there are a whole bunch of things that we need to implement based on the risk decisions the business made, but I don't have staff for it, well, then I need to get staff for that, right? The business is much more open to giving you budget when they know it's based on implementation of their risk decisions. And if they won't give you budget, well, then we just need to change the risk decision. It's a give or take.
That's the old PO in one hand, risk acceptance form in the other. I don't care which one gets signed, but I'm not leaving until one of them is.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you mentioned this needs to be formalized because people need to know why I'm here. Don't just assume that people know why the security program exists or why the security people are working here. It's not just to protect us from the Chinese or the Russians or the latest ransomware. We're also here to provide value to the business. Can we make things more efficient in this organization and at the same time make things more secure? I don't want to waste time. I don't want to waste money. I had a great discussion earlier today with a senior security person from IBM, and we were talking about just mentoring opportunities for this person and the importance of building the security program to enable the business to move forward as opposed to me just assuming because I don't have time to talk to them. So that's security personnel really have to almost over communicate. I got a tip once from the Domino's CISO who said he communicates until his gums bleed. So you really can't over communicate.
Well, especially when you're talking generally to somebody who does not have a command understanding of the topic.
Which is most people, even in our industry.
Correct.
I might add. Yep. So the last working way down is just all personnel.
I love
what are their responsibilities? Yeah.
So I love this because any organization that has built a culture of security and has created good, effective governance that's participatory and clearly defined, good roles, good responsibilities, and more of what we'll cover in the next episodes, those organizations create employees who become active defenders. And those are the most secure organizations on the planet. Any organization that has 50% or more of its employees actively participating in security defense by slowing down before they click the link, by verifying the request before they process it, those basic foundations, those organizations are statistically significantly less likely to experience a security event than those organizations with 10 times the budget and 200 times the staff.
Absolutely. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can really tell if there's alignment in your governance structure for information security. You know, when you do your assessments or audits or testing or phishing, whatever, you're right. Statistically, it will be much better when there's good alignment. Mm-hmm. If you see numbers that are outside of, your expectations, don't look at them. Don't, crack down on your employees. It's probably you. You didn't design this right. It needs to be tweaked. Just like, tuning an engine on a car, it requires constant tuning and care. So, and it really, if there's problems in any level, one of my peeves with security is when a CISO or a security manager or whoever complains that they don't have enough budget, or they complain about anything. Because ultimately, if you are consulting well, the people that you're talking to are intelligent people. They're skilled people. They're not making, reckless decisions because they're just reckless people. They're making the decisions that they're making because there's not alignment. I'm not consulting well. I can't get my budget because maybe I made the risk decisions. Maybe they didn't.
Yep.
That's a big problem.
Yep, I agree.
So you also hit on, and then we'll wrap this thing up and before we get into episode 10, I'm excited about that one too. You hit on the importance of documenting these things.
Yes.
These roles and responsibilities need to be documented. People will forget. It doesn't come second nature to anybody. So, being able to reference and refer back to this documentation on a regular basis that, oh yeah, I forgot. That is part of my role here. And where we document this is an information security charter document or similar. So make sure you don't just, well, here's our roles and responsibilities. We're good, right? Document it. Make sure everybody that's on that list that we just went through is aware of it. They've bought off on it because you don't want, it's hard to enforce rules too when people didn't know that they had the rules.
Absolutely. And I will say this in closing, making sure that you have a one up and one down on those roles and responsibilities as well. A lot of organizations, even if they get this part right, forget that people change jobs, get sick, go on vacation. So having, that crossover, and this is why documenting is so important, because if you ask somebody to step into another role for 1 week while someone's out dealing with a case of COVID, having that document readily available for them to refer to ensures that they're going to hit all the relevant points.
Yep, 100%. All right, that's a wrap for episode 9, Roles and Responsibilities. Tuning in next week for episode 10. We'll talk about information security policies. Everybody loves policies.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening.